Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over, the grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. As always, happy to be back and talking Utah athletics. You know, we'll get a little bit of Utah football. Yes, it's the offseason, but there's never really an offseason because this sport continues forever. So we'll get into some football to start. We'll also talk some basketball and some gymnastics and kind of go from there. But before we do that, let me tell you about our partners, Black Desert. So at Black Desert Resort, you can truly indulge in luxury your way. Whether you choose a sleek studio or an expansive 4-bedroom suite, you're just moments away from teeing off on a championship golf course. Savoring top-tier dining, relaxing poolside, or exploring the rugged beauty of southern Utah. Whatever thrill you seek, it's right outside your door. Your journey awaits at blackdesertresort.com. Get lost and find luxury. All right, well, let's just jump into this. Before we get into Utah football specifically, I find it interesting since last time, some of the coaches that were hired in college football. Two of them will impact Utah in terms of the Big 12, and one of them is just a bizarre hire, in my opinion, and that's Bill Belichick at North Carolina. It's a 5-year contract, I believe. And I personally don't see it working too well at the college ranks. I find it funny that he would even want to come here and recruit and go to terribly small stadiums and have to deal with all that kind of nonsense. But teach their own, and he's able to have full control at a college. So maybe that's what he wants, and we'll see. But the ones that have more impact to Utah are Scott Frost, UCF. He returns there, national championship winning coach. If you talk to UCF fans, I do find it funny when we went to Orlando to go to that Utah UCF game. They have that national champions written on their stadium and loud and proud. And if that was the case, they were named similarly to how Utah was named as national champions back in 2009 for their Sugar Bowl win. So that was done based on back before we had an actual national championship game. Obviously, teams were voted upon by various ballots or services. So you had the Associated Press who would say who their national champion is, and the New York Times. There's a bunch, and Utah was named national champions that year. And Utah obviously has played it up a little bit, but they're not putting that on their stadium. It's not on Rice-Eccles Stadium. But UCF, that's the bounce house has that there. I took a picture of it because I found it funny. But Scott Frost was the one to get them there. So I think they're trying to go back to that, the glory days, so to speak, and see if they can do more than what Gus Malzahn did and kind of the expectations that they had there. But interesting. The next one, another retread, and that's Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia. This one wasn't an easy transition for him. He left there kind of in a whirlwind, so to speak, and so he's back, trying to get West Virginia back and doing what they need to do. Pat McAfee was all over that and trying to welcome him and stuff like that. So. Wild stuff. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that because I don't really care. I just find it funny that you're bringing back former coaches, and Utah State saw that didn't necessarily work well with bringing Gary Anderson back. It has potential, but we'll see. But these are teams that are going to play Utah And so we'll see what happens. Rich Rodriguez, obviously, in his time in the Arizonas, it's fun. He's entertaining to watch on the sidelines, to say the least. So we'll see what that looks like. But you're not here to talk about that kind of stuff. Just found it funny. Moving to Utah football. So since we last talked, I did the podcast last Monday, I believe, and Utah has hired 2 position coaches. So you have Mark Atuaya. He is the running back coach, formerly at Washington State. He was there for the last 3 seasons. Had previously coached at Virginia, at BYU, as running back coaches there. He obviously played at BYU. This is an experienced coach, right? Like he's had experience coaching up some top running backs. He's a very personable guy. I haven't met him personally from his time in BYU, but from the conversations that I've had, he's very connected to the community. He wants to be able to work really hard to be able to build that room, and he's done a great job everywhere he's gone and being able to get that done. And so, you're bringing in a veteran guy that knows how to recruit, is very personable, wants to be involved in the mix, and is working really hard to be able to get there, or get these guys there and compete and do what they need to. At Washington State, he was effective enough that they made him the associate head coach. They loved him there. There's a great connection there. If you see him on Twitter or any of these other social media platforms, he is very active. He wants to make sure that there's that larger than life personality in there. I think it's really fascinating to kind of see what he's done. But he was hired, and there was already commits that were tagging him and everything. I mean, he's gone to work. His son, so he is a Latter-day Saint, and his son came home from a mission recently and actually gave his homecoming talk yesterday, and he was still here in Utah working away. There's a lot of busy stuff to do this weekend, and we'll get into that. But he's all committed. He's ready to go. Yes, this is another BYU guy, and the other guy that was hired is another BYU guy. So it's fascinating to kind of see how this goes. There's a lot of crossover with these 2 schools, which only makes this rivalry even more entertaining. So, Mark Atuaya, at least on paper, should be a good opportunity for Utah to be able to bring in some talent. The hope is that he can bring his star running back from Washington State to Utah. He is in the portal. That is Wayshawn Parker. He's the number 1 running back transfer in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. So, he is visiting Utah this week, so we'll see how that goes. But that would be a great opportunity for Utah to be able to have their lead back kind of come in there. Obviously, Mike Mitchell announced his return, and he'll still be here. But, if you can get a proven guy in there to take over and already have a connection with the running back coach, that helps. As we talked about with Jason Beck, the more familiarity you can get with some of these players, the better. It doesn't mean it'll be, an easy transition or that it'll just naturally turn to success. But it at least gives you a jump start to what's going on in the season because of, having that consistency in terms of personnel and understanding how they work and everything that way. So obviously great opportunity there with him. The other position coach that was hired on was Micah Simon, former wide receiver at BYU. He's much younger in the profession. Started out as an offensive analyst at Syracuse with Jason Beck in 2022. They coached a little bit together and were able to do things. And then Simon moved on to Northern Colorado, where he got his first full-time gig as a wide receiver coach at 2023, and then moved over to New Mexico last year as another wide receiver coach, working once again with Beck. And so there is a connection there. He's not as proven in terms of his longevity in the coaching career. But obviously there's something that Beck sees that gives him confidence, and the more the offensive coordinator has confidence in the guys around him, the better, right? I truly believe that. I think if they can have that opportunity to kind of build the roster that they need to, that helps. Obviously, that leaves Quinton Ganther and Alvis Whitted, on the sideline. They were not retained. Quinton, he's always been more of an NFL guy and wants to coach there. That's where he came from before coming back to Utah as a coach. So I have to imagine that, once this NFL season ends, he's going to be a hot name that gets picked up in the NFL. Alvis Whitted also could be in that category. I don't know that he's going to push as hard to be able to get there, but both of these were great coaches for Utah, and I think the way that this last season ended, it's going to put a damper on kind of who these individuals are. But they worked hard, right? They absolutely had the best interest of Utah in mind. To varying degrees, right? Obviously, Quinton got frustrated with the level of NIL stuff and everything there. He was pretty vocal about how much it costs to be able to get a star running back in. Personally, I'm not going to get into whether I think that held him back in recruiting, because I don't think it did. I think he tried really hard. He brought in a lot of talent. He sought after a lot of talent that he wanted, and sometimes it went his way, sometimes it didn't. So, I don't think that should be a black mark on his career here at Utah, because I think he did everything he needed to. He coached them up. He demanded discipline, and if more than anything, he brought order back into that room. Because when Tavion Thomas was here, it was chaotic, and everything was kind of allowed to be done the way that they wanted to be done, which really frustrated people. And so he had to come in here and kind of lay it down, essentially, and really clean up a room that needed a lot of help. So obviously it didn't have the production it needed to this year. Mekhi Bernard obviously had a lot of success and was able to do what he did and rushed for over 1,000 yards. But I think a lot of people are going to look at this last season and say, okay, he didn't do a great job, when in reality, I really do think he was effective and did well. It's just kind of the nature of it. As far as Alvis Whitted, he was put in a tough position because there was nothing that he did wrong. He recruited at a high level, obviously brought in some great talent in the wide receiver room, so he recruited well. He coached them up. The biggest issue there is he just didn't have a quarterback to throw to his guys. And so it's hard to judge kind of their level of consistency. But you saw, especially late in the season, somebody like a Dadrian Zipperer or a Zach Williams, that as they kept getting into the system, you could see progress. And so you have to see that there was something done there where he coached them up. He's much more of a laid-back guy, but he very much so worked with these guys, and they had his trust. And so, that's a tough spot. You have to hope that he lands on his feet somewhere, because he is a good coach. And I think this is just the nature of an offensive coordinator that wants to work with his guys, and when this is kind of the easy route to be able to do it, because these are the two position coaches that generally are the ones that get nixed, when you're trying to change stuff on the offensive side of the ball. So whether there were other issues, in the locker room, I haven't heard that about these two coaches or any of the problems that way. So I don't think there was anything there. It's just the nature of trying to do that full reset of the offense that I've talked about. And so what you're going to do is you're going to have, your running back coach and your wide receiver coach kind of get that change. You're keeping, Jim Harding as your offensive line coach, obviously been a great coach, has recruited really well, been able to have a great offensive line. And I know there was problems on the interior, and that's not necessarily a Harding fault. It's more just the nature of what happened this season. When you have an inexperienced quarterback behind you, that also doesn't help the offensive line to some extent. So you're obviously retaining him, and then Freddie Whittingham is staying with his brother. I think that's a tough one to let go, and I think that one stays, right. And so you've got some holdover from the last few years, but at the same time, you're now bringing in the bulk of your offense outside of, let's say, offensive line, where this is, a new staff, right? You've got the offensive coordinator and Jason Beck, who now is dictating, controlling things, very active in the recruiting of people out of the transfer portal. You've got now two guys that have been hungry and ready, that have Beck's trust, that have worked with him over the years. And so there has the potential to be able to be a lot of consistency and just effectiveness in terms of how they're able to work together, right? we'll see if that translates onto the field. We've got a whole year essentially to be able to see this. So, still early, but you do get those coaches, and we'll see what happens. Obviously, the defensive side of the ball stays intact. Morgan Scalley is running that ship, and obviously we've talked about kind of his future and what that could mean. So there's that. But, the big part here is this is the time of the year where this is very active for the transfer portal. And I touched on this last time, where because Utah isn't in a bowl game, where they're not focusing on prep and they're not focusing on practice, this becomes what Utah is doing 24/7. And so there is an advantage to some extent to not be in a bowl game, especially in this scenario where you needed to retool an offense. And obviously, if you're in a bowl, you don't need to retool the offense to some extent, right? I mean, if Utah had won one more game and went 6-6, I don't know that would have changed. Utah still would have needed to be in a position to change their offense. Even 7-5, I think you're probably in a similar spot. But obviously, that changes kind of the feeling of the season and everything there. But this is a great opportunity for Utah as long as they can continue to capitalize on it. And it's been active, right? Utah, since the last time we did a podcast, they did lose 2 players. Carson Ryan is a tight end. I don't know that this was a direct correlation with Landon King announcing that he was coming back. For a long time, I think the thought was that King was going to enter the portal just because of how this season went. Obviously, was frustrated with kind of how it went and didn't get a lot of playing time. Came on a little bit more at the end of the season, but obviously likes what he sees with this offensive staff. Wanted to come back. Carson Ryan wanted another opportunity. It just didn't jive for Utah. He is a Utah kid. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to BYU, just simply being from here and wanting to stay here, having that experience and everything. But he did play at UCLA, so he's not, averse to leaving the state. But I think, those close ties probably draw him to BYU. If Bronco Mendenhall at Utah State can pull him away, that's a big boon for him and everything. But talented kid, obviously tough to see him go simply because, there was a lot of potential there. I think Utah could have done well with Carson Ryan, and for the most part, he did well in the reps that he got, but just that quarterback situation really hurt that. The big surprise of the transfer portal season, though, has been Cam Calhoun. This is a corner that transferred in last year from Michigan. It had been relatively a lockdown corner, right? He developed, he grew, had progressed, and even at the end of the season was all committed. Sent out the tweet saying he was a Utah man. He was actively trying to recruit players to Utah, getting fans involved, trying to get them to kind of let their influence known and in some of these recruits. And then suddenly, out of the blue, he enters the transfer portal, and essentially another school. And there's debate. The Salt Lake Tribune reported that it was BYU that threw a bunch of money at him to get him into the portal. I've heard there's been some other schools as well that have been kind of linked to that. Wisconsin was the first offer that he posted, and I've heard that Wisconsin is kind of in the mix of that. Regardless, it doesn't really matter what school it is. He got this offer, and Utah either decided that they didn't want to offer or to match it, or that they couldn't. Who knows? I don't think Utah's necessarily hurting for their money, but they also have to prioritize other people, especially in the portal or wherever that may be, returning players, that kind of stuff. And so, Cam Calhoun is now in the portal. Now there's a world where he can come back. All of these transfers in theory can come back based on, how this works. There's no guarantee that Kyle will allow them to come back. But there is potential. So never say never, but at the same time, he decided to follow the money, and that can be a good choice or a bad choice, depending on how this goes. Obviously, Utah has done well to develop corners and safeties and, these defensive backs. And so, for his sake, you have to hope that he's going into a right situation and not just chasing a little bit more money. But at the same time, it's hard not to chase some of the money, especially some of it that's being thrown around nowadays. And if you've been proven to be a talented player, that's good on you to be able to go get paid. I've said this, if somebody were to double my salary, and I'm not saying that Cam got that kind of money, but if somebody were to double my salary, I'd have to take a hard look at what I was doing, right? It doesn't always work out, and I think, situations, the old saying is, the greener pastures, looking that way, and it's not always better, and I botched that saying. That's not what I was trying to say. I wasn't trying to say it verbatim, but man, what was that? But at the same time, it isn't always a great situation, and so we'll see what happens there. But for the most part, Utah, they haven't really lost a ton of other talent. Those were the two that were, as of late, that were the most impactful. That's not to say the other guys in the room that left weren't impactful, but it's just it's more depth players that haven't had their chance yet to really play, and so really interesting to kind of see how this develops. But so far, since that initial push of players entering the portal, it's been relatively quiet. I know Utah is still kind of having to lock down deals with some players. It's a new era where you have to lock in some of these players, and all of them essentially. But there's still ongoing conversations there. But for the most part, the full attention is on the transfer portal in terms of who they're going to bring in, and so. Let's move to that. Since we did the last podcast, Utah has gotten 6 transfers, and so the first one, obviously being the biggest, is Devin Dampier. I went pretty hard on him the last few times and talking about kind of his impact here, but great opportunity for Utah, especially if he lives up to that potential or even higher. He has 3 years to play 2 seasons. He hasn't redshirted yet, and so you've got an opportunity there to have him as a starter for 2 seasons. If he has a success that takes a step up from last year, maybe there's a tough conversation at the end of the year that he goes to the NFL and you only have him for 1 year. But if that's the case, you have to be happy, because that probably means that Utah's had a lot of success. So regardless of the situation, 2 years, that's great. But if you can get him for 1 year and it means that he's having a lot of success, that bodes well for Utah. So you've got that. I'm not going to go too extensively on him since we've already done that. Then you pick up a JUCO transfer, Jeremiah Caldwell from Garden City Community College. He started out his career as a 4-star corner. Went to Louisville, transferred to Miami, Ohio. And then it didn't really work out on those 2 places. Really didn't play. I mean, he redshirted his first year. So Louisville was just a redshirt season. Transferred to Miami. Man, I'm having a hard time saying that today. Only played 5 games and then was done for the season, and then went into the JUCO route. And it seemingly has kind of turned a corner and ready to contribute for Utah. The JUCO route is not always easy, right? And as you've seen in the transfer portal era, the JUCO players just aren't being picked up as much as they used to. And so it becomes a tough route for these guys. But Utah has seen some talent there. I don't know how much of a work in progress he's going to be. Over the years, Kyle Whittingham has talked about that sometimes in those JUCO levels, you learn bad habits and you're not getting the same consistency and level of coaching. And so sometimes you have to break out some of these guys. But obviously, coming out of the high school ranks, had a lot of talent. Was, like I said, he was a 4-star corner, and so the evaluations on him were good. It's just a matter of if he can now reach that potential, right? Should have 2 to 3 years of eligibility. Those JUCO years always kind of make it interesting, and there's ongoing cases as well about JUCO years, and so court case, I should say. So it's undecided on how those are necessarily going to play. Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt filed a lawsuit talking about how the JUCO years shouldn't be classified as NCAA eligibility because they're not part of the NCAA, and so it doesn't really matter. Either way, probably a 2-year guy at Utah if they can get him 1 year. If they if they can get him to maximize that, but you get a corner and do well. You also get a Ryan Phillips as a punter from Missouri. This guy, I tweeted about it. I want to see him just tackle somebody hard and then just take off his helmet and let his hair fly. I know that's not okay. That's a penalty and everything, and Kyle Whittingham would lose his mind. But for our sake, you got to let that flow go, right? I mean, it's if you remember the Titans, this is sunshine. He's got those locks and he's ready to go. So interesting to see there. But you do have a punter. Don't know how he'll factor into this yet, but you lost Jack Baumeister, so you have to imagine that he's at least in the mix there. I know this Dylan Curtis kid, they want him to potentially punt as well, but we'll see how that goes. And then you get a legacy defensive end in Jackson Jones, comes over from Oregon, redshirted the entire season this last year, so he hasn't played at all. He's got 4 years of eligibility. We'll see how that goes. Utah can obviously add more depth to that defensive end room and do well, and we'll see what happens. But got a lot of good coaching at Oregon, so you have to imagine that this isn't going to be necessarily a tough transition. But this becomes a great opportunity for Utah to have another guy that could be in the mix. And then the last two are on the offensive side of the ball. So you've got Creed Whitmore, wide receiver from Mississippi State. This was a highly, highly rated wide receiver coming out of high school. He was rated a 94 by 247 Sports. He actually played quarterback in high school, dual threat guy, passed for 2,700 yards, 35 touchdowns, a near 60% completion rate, and then also rushed for almost 1,300 yards and 17 touchdowns. So just from that standpoint alone, I mean, he's got talent. Obviously wasn't recruited as a quarterback. He was recruited as an athlete and primarily worked out as a wide receiver. So really fascinated by this commitment. Comes out of Florida, Gainesville, Florida, where obviously if you can be effective at a high level in Florida, it generally bodes well for you. So this is a guy that has a lot of potential for Utah, and if they can maximize this, I think Utah's really gotten a steal of the draft. Now I'm talking NFL. Still of the transfer portal. There's obviously a lot of great talent out there, but I mean, I think this is a guy that could come in here and really do some damage. Has 3 years of eligibility. He redshirted last year. So, Mississippi State was not really a great situation, but a highly, highly touted kid, and, you'll have to see what happens there. And then lastly, last night you get Michael Washington Jr. He's a running back from New Mexico State. He's I talked about Wayshawn Parker being kind of that guy that Utah's still targeting, and Wayshawn in theory would be kind of your lead back, right? He's the dominant guy. Washington, that's not to say that he can't be in that mix, but he's kind of like your depth running back and would provide a lot of talent. He comes out of New York. He did well last year as their second leading rusher at New Mexico State with 725 yards, 8 touchdowns. And so you only get him for 1 year, but essentially is a depth piece. And, Utah's going to continue to target more guys that are going to kind of do more. But if you have Dampier, you have some of these other guys. I mean, you look at Whitmore. I mean, maybe you get some creativity there where because he can throw the ball and he's been this two-sport athlete, maybe think of a Britton Covey type player. Maybe that gives you the potential to kind of mix and match some stuff. So you've got Dampier, you've got Whitmore, you've got Washington. If you're able to get Wayshawn Parker, or maybe Eli Sanders, follows Dampier from New Mexico and comes up here, there's a lot of potential here for Jason Beck to kind of mix and match and do some things with some talented athletes that can really make things a challenge. Then you add in what Utah already has in the roster, and there's a lot of potential there already. That doesn't mean that Utah's done. There's a lot of players that they still need to recruit, but this last week they hosted a ton of players. It's almost 10. I don't think that was the full number from what I've heard, but a fair amount, and Utah's going to continue to be active this week as well into the weekend. I believe Wayshawn Parker and a few other guys are visiting this weekend, so we'll see how that goes. But the big focus still is going to be on running back. If you can get that lead back, you've got to be able to find that, whether that's Parker or whether that's Eli Sanders or somebody else. There's a whole bunch of players that Utah's targeting. That's kind of your main focus right now, in my opinion. As I said in the past, you're going to find the best guys available if they're available to you. But there's going to be some priorities here, right? And then those are running back. You've got to be able to build that room. You've got to be able to find a lead guy to be able to take over. Parker would be a fantastic fit. Obviously, as I said, he understands what the running back coach does, has been effective. He's got a lot of years available to him, and so I think it's a great potential. to be able to have that. Next up is you got to get more wide receivers. So you're going to continue to target that, and I know they've got a lot of guys that they're focused in on. So you've got wide receivers. Corner is obviously going to be another key area. You're always going to try to find more depth there in the secondary and trying to do that. So there's that. You're going to try to find QB depth as well. It's going to be harder now that you do have your starter, right? I think especially early on right now in the transfer portal, we've got until December 28th where guys can still enter the portal. That's not to say that guys can't, commit way after that, but you at least have to be in the portal then. I don't want to say guys are going to get desperate, but I think you're going to start seeing, these depth quarterbacks take a different look at Utah once the dust is settled, right? There's going to be a lot of schools trying to get their top guys, trying to get their starter, so to speak, or at least a guy that's going to compete for that job, and then they're going to start looking at the depth, and some of these guys are going to fall to Utah. So don't be surprised if that one's a little bit later. Maybe it even comes, after the spring transfer portal period. Ideally for Utah is you get somebody in before spring, so that you can have that, be in that system. As much as you can rely on Devin Dampier to be your starter, you can't fall into that same trap that you had with Cam Rising, where you recruit only to him, and you put all of those eggs in that basket, and then you're kind of done when something happens. And so they are going to be actively working to be able to get another quarterback, but don't be surprised if that quarterback doesn't come soon. That's not to say it couldn't, but that's a tough position to be able to recruit, especially if you know that Dampier has 2 years of eligibility, and whatever. So, there's always a potential you can try to bring in Brandon Rose again or Isaac Wilson and try to get them back in that room as a backup, but a tougher spot in my opinion. We'll see what kind of the interest is for them. And then, you're always going to try to find more talent, but maybe at linebacker, maybe some of these other positions on the defense. But for the most part, that's kind of the focus there is running back, wide receiver, corner, and QB depth. So that's kind of that. So that's it for football today, because we're still just kind of waiting on the transfer portal stuff. Still haven't had a chance to talk to any of the coaching staff. They're not going to talk at this time of the year anyway, because they're actively working on getting guys in. So this will be a big push right before Christmas, right before that transfer portal window closes, at least getting guys in. And then continuing going into January, that's going to be a big focus on trying to get guys to get them in before the school session starts. I believe Utah, their eligibility, it's something like January 10th or 12th or something like that players have to enroll before they're not eligible for the semester. There's usually some sort of grace period, but I can't remember exactly. But this, you're trying to get the main guys in before spring so that you can get them acclimated and ready to go. Jason Beck's system is a little bit easier to learn, and so I don't know that there's as much of a worry to be able to come in, plug and play type player in the fall camp. But as any system goes, you want to be able to have more familiarity with it. You want to be exposed to it. You want to play in it, practice in it. And so anybody that you can get before the spring session is going to bode well for you. So that's that. So let's move over to basketball. As I've mentioned, we'll slowly transition more to basketball as this develops. But right now it's still football. Men's basketball, this has been interesting. They're kind of in an interesting spot, because I still think this is a very talented team that will probably exceed expectations from where they were at. I mean, picked last, it's hard not to, but at the same time, this is a team that can be talented. But they have some of these games, where they're not always clicking. There's not a lot of rhythm, and it's been a challenge the last few weeks to kind of get in that. And that's something that Craig Smith has talked about a lot recently, is the team needs to get back into that rhythm. They had it early on where it was a free-flowing system, positionless, everything was going well. Utah went more of a smaller ball system because of out of necessity. You didn't have Lawson Lovering or Zach Keller, your two bigs, in there, and that kind of changes things a little bit. But now that they're in there, and I'm not saying this is a full correlation, I think it was starting to slip before then, but you're starting to see these guys get out of a little bit of a rhythm. And so it's not quite hero ball where guys are just trying to take their own shots, but it's not quite to that level where they're passing the ball around a ton. They're not moving it around. They're still getting a high amount of assists, and they're not turning over the ball a ton, but it's just not the free-flowing system that we've seen before. They kind of sleepwalk through this Radford game, and that's to be expected, right? Like, you're not expected to play the same level of intensity that you did, let's say, St. Mary's, or what's going to happen when you play Iowa this week, or when you get into the Big 12 play. But at the same time, you want to be able to see them at a high enough level where it looks good, right? Hunter Erickson comes in off the bench, and he scores 18 points, leads the team, really kind of did a bang-up job for him, did well. Really kind of led that. He was so effective. I don't want to say so effective, but like, he was effective enough that he was the one that got the minutes over Mike Sharavjamps. Sharavjamps has been in the starting unit. He even started on Saturday, but only got 4 minutes of game time. Had some turnovers. It's just kind of fallen out of the rotation a little bit. Just hasn't played the same level that he had early on. Right, early on it was. Everybody wants to play with him, and that's not to say that they don't still, but he was playing well. His length, really disrupted a lot of what other teams were trying to do. He was a great facilitator of the ball, and suddenly it's just kind of dropped off. And there's some things that he needs to work on. He's had conversations with Craig Smith, and they're trying to work through this because he is in a bit of a slump. And so whether he falls out of that rotation, I don't know. But it's shrinking for him, right? And I think it's getting to the point where if he's not going to play at the level that they need him to, he's going to slowly fall out of the rotation. He's not going to be in a great spot, and some of that may be personality, where he's frustrated, and so he's doing things to kind of hurt himself. Other things where he's just not kind of playing to the level that Craig wants him to. That's a combination of things. And so curious to see how that goes. Usually if you're a starter, you've been given that trust, and he has been given that trust, and then now it's just kind of slowly fading. So curious to see tomorrow when Utah takes on Florida A&M, another kind of last low-level opponent before getting into the thick of your schedule. What happens, right? Does he kind of have a resurgence? Does he able to get in there? I'm curious to see what happens there. But other guys are stepping up, right? Miro Little has done a great job at the point. You've been able to get Hunter Erickson in there, he's just been a hustler. I don't think his ceiling is as high, but at the same time, he's a guy that's going to get in there and he's going to mix it up with everybody. Now, you've got to do that at a higher level in terms of the competition. And, his defense is absolutely valued because he gets in there and works really tough to be able to stop the opposing team. But like I said, I think the ceiling for Sharavjamps is a little bit higher, but it's got to manifest itself on the court. So curious to see what happens there. Keanu Dawes, freshman, he early on he was kind of the guy to fill in for Ezra Asar. Kind of got that second unit opportunity. He didn't even play on Saturday and has been kind of falling out of the rotation. That's part of the nature of being a freshman, as well as kind of Craig Smith just shrinking the rotations. You can't continue to go 10 deep, 12 deep, whatever it may be, and continue to have effectiveness. And so he's trying to find the players that he can get in there. That's not to say that Dawes is not in that mix. Honestly, Dawes has some true, real potential that you get him on that court and he's going to fight. But at the same time, we don't see what's happening in the practice facility. We don't see, kind of the development that he needs necessarily. But for the time being, Craig Smith has elected to kind of push him out of the rotation, especially as he gets in Lawson Lovering and Zach Keller into there. Curious to see kind of how that goes as well. But those are two players that have fallen out. Outside of that, you're getting consistent play. Lawson Lovering, he's not always the most fluid guy out there, but he provided some great minutes on Saturday, did really well. If I remember right, he had 12 points, and just kind of dictated what Utah needed to, especially on defense, and then added some effectiveness to the offensive side of the ball. Caleb Lohner, still kind of transitioning to the basketball realm, got into the mix and is providing some physicality. Looked a little bit better in terms of basketball conditioning on Saturday, but he's still not fully there yet. There's going to be some polishing there, and still looks like he wants to run over a guy as he drives to the basket, which, if the refs aren't calling it, it's all good. And take it. But, there's going to be some fine tuning with his game, but he's definitely in the mix. And quite honestly, it's probably taken Keanu Dawes' minutes. I don't know if that's Craig wanting that physicality out of him, as well as Lohner is a veteran player that has played for many years in his last year. So, either way, this is a team that still has potential. They've been able to compete at a high level, but it's just a matter of if they can maintain that, if they can get that rhythm back. It seems like this team is still together. There's no reason for it not to be, but it changes when you change up the rotations and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see what happens there. They're going to go into Big 12 play after this week, where they get Florida A&M and Iowa on a neutral site on Saturday. That'll be a key game for Utah to really jumpstart the Big 12 play. But in the same vein, Big 12 play has kind of fallen off a bit this year. It hasn't been, quote unquote, the best conference in America this year. It's early, right? Non-conference play is tough. A lot of these top teams are playing other top teams, and so it becomes a challenge. But the Big 12, in terms of Ken Palm's rankings of the conferences, has fallen behind the SEC and Big 10. Weird, these two leagues are separating in all sports. It's kind of weird how that works, but money will do that. But we're now in a world where there's no more undefeated teams in the Big 12. Each one kind of has a loss that has been close. Some have been some head scratchers, not for all, but this is going to be an interesting year. And if Utah can hit at the right time and they can play that connected ball, hit their 3-pointers. To that point, side note, I think one of the biggest things, so for example, in that Radford game, the talk that I've had and conversations that I've had is that when Utah isn't able to hit those 3-pointers, does this team wilt, right? It's that live or die by the 3-pointer. And early on, Utah was absolutely thriving on that. And you were able to dominate teams because of that. Granted, some of those are based on the defense and giving open looks. But Utah had plenty of open looks against Radford, and they just didn't fall. So when those aren't falling, how does Utah respond? And so I think as much as they sleepwalked through that game, that was a great response to be able to see that Utah can find different ways to score. Now, I don't know that this team is built to rely on that at a consistent level. I still think the 3-point shot has to fall for Utah to be able to have some effectiveness, but they can show that they can score in different ways. And Craig Smith has talked about that, right? He's talked about needing to score in different ways, especially in the Big 12, where teams are going to take away different things, right? Not everybody's going to allow you to shoot the 3-pointers as free as they have up to this point in the season. So how does Utah find scoring? Obviously, you can go some inside-out work with Lawson Lovering or Zach Keller or maybe even Caleb Lohner or some other guys, but you've got to find some creativity and try to find some shots that aren't going to always be the 3-point. Now, that's still going to be their bread and butter. And if it's available, Utah can be deadly there. But when those shots don't fall, what happens? And I think we got a good answer to that on Saturday. Now, was it perfect? No, because I think this is still a team that has to rely on that. They're great shooters, but it's from deep. And so I don't know, that this team is built to win it with 2-point shots or in the post and, getting second chance opportunities and doing things that way. But it is promising that Utah necessarily hasn't wilted. In years past where Utah wasn't hitting 3-pointers, and they weren't getting their shots off that way, they wilted, and it absolutely turned into a blowout because Utah had no other answer. So we'll see what happens there. On the women's side, women are up to, last I looked, and this could be already outdated today, 24th in the net. They faced a 10-point deficit going into the fourth quarter on the road to Washington. It's kind of a weird game where the teams kind of switched quarters on being hot. And then suddenly Gianna Neepkins and Maya Torre absolutely unleashed in the fourth quarter. They combined for 24 points of the 27 24 of the 27 points scored in the fourth quarter to end up beating Washington by 10 points. used a 15-3 run to push that advantage, did really well there, and then held Washington to 1 of 13 in that final quarter to get a win. So against a former Pac-12 opponent, it was a great opportunity. These two teams know each other inside and out, and so it's a lot of challenge to be able to come into that, whereas going into the Big 12, these teams don't necessarily know a lot about each other outside of the little film that they've got. But a good push from Utah. Obviously, you'd like to see them be more consistent throughout the game. But at the same time, the fact that you could get Neepkins doing what she did, she was 8 of 8 from the free throw line in that quarter, just absolutely perfect there and did well for him. She continues to be the main focus of this offense, and this is a team that still has the same potential that they've always had. They can be a deep run in the tournament, but I think the margin for error is a little bit bigger this year than it was last year when you had Alyssa Peely. I think it's easy to be able to fall out of that if things aren't hitting. And so, Neepkins is starting to look much more comfortable playing now. Coming off of an injury, it's tough to kind of get into that. Kind of looked a little slow in the step at first, more hesitancy maybe, and that's just my viewing. I don't necessarily think that was a huge thing, but you're starting to see her really kind of thrive more and get back to who she was before the injury. So good for that. Torre obviously providing some great minutes. If I remember right, she only had 12 points in the entire game and scored 10 in the final quarter. So she provided some great minutes, especially on the defensive side of the ball where she was getting defensive rebounds that proved pivotal for second chance opportunities for Washington. That was as much of a factor in Utah being able to do what they did. So great opportunity for the women, and they start conference play on Saturday against Arizona State. So we'll see how that goes. Once again, it's another former Pac-12 team, so there's a lot of understanding there. But this will be a game at home, and it's a fun team to watch, so give it a look. And then lastly, the Red Rocks did a Red Rocks preview. This is a deep team. They've got a ton of talent, a lot of people on the roster, probably the biggest roster I think I've ever seen at Utah, at least in the time that I've covered them. But first off, Jaden Rucker announces just before the preview that she's out for the season with an Achilles injury. Tough break for her. Coming back, obviously, as a sixth-year gymnast, she wanted to come in here and compete for a national title. Truly believed that Utah was right there for the taking and being able to get it, and then suffers that injury right before the season. And that's just a devastating blow for her more than anything. I think this team can absorb that, but at the same time, just a tough break for her. But she's going to be in there. She's going to be in that mix. She's going to continue to talk and help and mentor a lot of these gymnasts that are new to the program. But this was a fun meet. It's kind of crazy to go to these because the Red Rocks preview outdrew the men's basketball game. And this was just a preview. This wasn't even a meet. So really fascinating. A lot of people are curious to see what this team looks like. They ended up putting out 43 total events in the preview, so a lot of different things going on. Got a lot of different gymnasts kind of going in the different rotations, trying to see who could fit into the rotations and stuff. But more importantly, we got to see the new freshman, right? And at the top of that is Avery Neff. She was the number 1 recruit in the country coming into this class, so there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on her. Hometown kid from Bingham High, South Jordan area. This has been her dream school forever, and it was really fun to be able to talk to her after the meet, to be able to kind of get her perspective on it, because everything about that, and this wasn't even a true meet where you had an opponent on the other side. This was a dream come true for her, and her very first event on vault, she landed what arguably could be a 10.0. It was perfect. Probably could have got a little more distance, and so maybe they dock her a little bit, but perfect stick. This is a great opportunity for Utah to be able to have somebody that can perform in the all-around for 4 years, right? And be able to compete at a high level as the number 1 recruit in the country. But you also had other freshmen that stood out. Clara Raposo, Poppy Grace Stickler, and then Zoe Johnson. She was not in the mix. She's the other freshman. She did not perform because she injured her back previously, and so is close to coming back. She should be able to be there before competition starts on January 3rd. But good look from those freshmen. You also had some other gymnasts that came in and did really well. But by and large, this is a deep team. There's a lot of depth here where there's not necessarily an immediate weakness, right? Just the fact that Avery Neff did that on vault kind of shows the level that Utah has pushed to be able to build up on vault, where vault has been kind of their biggest weakness, right? Floor became a big event for Utah last year, where they started developing their bars became a big event. Beam was always consistent and they did well, but vault was always what held them back and essentially kept them from a national championship last year. So to that level, they've worked really hard to be able to hire. They brought in a new guy, Mike Hunger. He's a former club coach of Grace McCallum, years of experience at the club level. He comes in there and he coaches the vault, and it looked much better this year. They're coming off the block well, and they're also looking for better sticks, whereas last year it was like they're trying to find it. They really weren't knowing where to go, and so it looks much more crisp this early in the season. So you have to like that for the Red Rocks. But all in all, deep team, a team that 100% can compete for a national championship like they do every single year. This is their 50th season as a program. They're the first team to ever win a national championship at the NCAA level. So, this is the year where Utah's really looking to make that push. They're ranked number 5 in the country right now, which may be underrated. Who knows? We'll see. But Carly Dockendorf at the end of the preview said this team is tired of coming in third place for the last 4 years. They want to do something different. And that's not a second place finish, right? Obviously that's improvement, but they want to do something special in this final season. Not final. That's not what I meant to say. 50th season, final 50, kind of close, but they want to do something special in this 50th season and really bring back a national championship to Utah. So a lot of talent out there. We'll see how this goes. We'll get more understanding of what this team looks like and everything as the season progresses. As I said, they start on January 3rd, so we'll get in the mix there. But it should be a fun situation there for the Red Rocks. If you haven't checked out gymnastics, honestly, you've got to try it once. You don't have to know anything about gymnastics, but just go in there, and it's probably the best environment for any sporting event at Utah Athletics. It's entertaining. There's a lot going on. You have tremendous athletes that don't get as much credit as they should because not a lot of people are watching them compared to, let's say, football or basketball. But Utah is one of the blue bloods of gymnastics. And so if you want to see a good time, go check them out because they're a lot of fun. They've won me over, honestly, in terms of being able to be excited about going to these meets. They're a lot of fun. One of my favorite sports to cover. So, we'll continue to talk about that stuff. But that's it this week. I don't know if we'll get another podcast in this week or before Christmas, just based on what's happening. But if there's something big happens or there's a lot of stuff going on, then potentially we'll do one either later in the week or early next week. But if I don't chat with you in the before Christmas, I hope you guys have a great holidays or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever holiday you celebrate or don't celebrate, depending on what you do. But I hope you have a great holidays, and we will chat with you guys again soon. So with that, we'll sign off today, and I appreciate you all for listening, and have a great day.